All right, Derek. Derek.
Okay, let me
It's
talk.
no. Okay, yeah, sure.
You just did a bunch. It's my turn. Mom
Yeah,
says
but
it's my turn
we
on the
started a new
talking
episode. Let
machine.
me sum up. No, okay, go. I'm just gonna repeat myself anyways.
Okay.
What's the point of summing up?
Yeah. So, uh, let's say, or in the reason I say it's similar to Schrodinger's cat, and there's about a 50% chance of things working out or things not. Let's say you're going to change the you're going to try to change the wedding.
Right.
You're trying to interrupt the wedding. First off, time travel in itself is usually selfish.
Doesn't have
And
to
so
be.
it doesn't have to be, but in this
Back to the
situation it
Future.
is. And in this situation it is.
Sure.
It usually is selfish. Let's say you go back in time and you see the what or you change the what you succeed. You get put on the invite list. You get an invite. You go to the wedding. You show up. Uh, change everything and the end result is that you're with this person instead of whoever they were going to be, or whoever was going to be with them. In this outcome, almost or the only thing that's changed is who's with this person. And while yes, that can have adverse effects, maybe maybe the person she was going to marry was going to be the next president and do an even worse job than past presidents, with her guiding him towards that, which would be bad. Or maybe he's just a bad person and she was going to not have him be a bad, or help him not be. Wait. No, maybe he's just a bad person and without her he's just going to be a bad president. Wait, I feel like I repeated myself. No. Without her, he's going to be a good president.
Here.
That's right. I'm saying basically your actions ultimately lead to. Let's say she marries him, and
Yeah.
He becomes president, and he's a good president. And then
Sure.
you go back in time, and then you marry her, and because he's not with her, he becomes president, but he's a bad president.
Wait. Oh God. You gotta be kidding me. This is an endless runner. I don't like that. Did I get that? I got that now.
I still don't know what this game entirely is. It seems like it's just every platformer.
I think that. I mean, yeah. I think that's supposed to be the goal.
We're playing like platforming games we've played in like we're going back to like all platformers we've played on this show.
This is fucking Bubsy.
Yeah.
This is literally Bubsy.
So
like, it's actually Bubsy. No, I want him to go down there. Okay, I did. Sorry. Keep going.
So let's say you like let's say because of your actions, we now have a bad president instead of a good president. Your time travel has ultimately made the state of the United States worse.
Yeah.
And probably the people inhabiting it.
Yeah.
However, there's also potential of, let's say he's a bad president and she's married to him, and you're like, oh no, I'm gonna go back in time and save her from marrying a bad president. So you go back in time and you marry her, and then you get back. And then when he becomes president again, but now he's a good president because it turns out that it was her fault that he was like that.
Okay.
So now you've inadvertently made the present a better time for the United States. And its inhabitants.
Yeah.
It's so going back in time going back in. Let's say he was like let's say he was a meh president, like he was middle of the road. He was neutral. People didn't. Not everybody hate, and most people didn't hate him, but people weren't like he wasn't the best president.
Well,
if you go back in time and marry
you're gonna
her,
have to still factor
could-
in how that marriage works for the both of you. If it made her life better, then it's still arguably a good action, because it you know, she's
yeah, but you
good.
well, yeah, I guess you could argue you could argue that too. Well, it depends. Yeah, but you've also like screwed over a bunch of people, essentially.
Well, not
in the
president
bad
was bad
America.
before. Then I made it. I made it better just by him being.
That was the thing, Zinker, is that you made it better. You in that scenario, you made it better. For everybody, and subsequently, you probably made it better for her too.
Yeah.
Whether or not she knows it, you probably made it better for her too. So yeah, in the scenario where in the one scenario you make things better for everybody. In the scenario where
sorry, doing the
in
dive
the,
just makes you hit the springs again, which is funny.
in the scenario where you or where he was good and then you made him bad, or by him not being with her, you may have improved her life, but you probably improved her life, but you probably screwed over a bunch of other people.
Yeah,
in
so
which
that's
case
a bad action.
Yeah, so that's a bad action. That was what I was describing. Is the first scenario was a bad action, the second one was a good action. Now let's say he's a neutral president, and then you go back in time to steal his wife. The fact that you doing that for one thing is kind of selfish in itself. So it's
already
it could be
action.
considered a bad. It's already
Arguably.
it's a bad action from that point of view. There's no arguing that you are already taking a bad action. However, the results on other people's lives could be good or good or bad, based off of what ultimately happened. What ultimately taking him or taking her from him does to him. If he ends up being a bad president because of it, or he ends up being a good president because of it. He could also just stay a neutral president and there could be no impact. It's all three are possible. So I from that not barring the your own selfish act, once you've gone back in time, or if you are knowingly changing something, like that, changing it isn't going to it's a neutral action because it could potentially be good or it could potentially be bad.
It's a bad action, specifically. For one thing, the problem with it is you are assuming that you get this ability to make this decision. This isn't your decision to make. Whether or not, you're assuming this is what everyone wants, whether it's good or bad. Like, you are taking the risk and reward without consulting everyone involved, which in this case would be the entire United States. You are making this decision that people might not be okay with, because you might be perfectly fine with the risk reward. But you were
the United
assuming
States impacts the world too, so it's really everybody.
What's up?
I said the United States can have an impact on the whole world, really. So like you're kind of impacting everybody.
Yeah,
because it can impact trade, other things like that too.
And you do so without consulting it. That's the problem with it being a selfish action. Even if you go back, if you go back in time to say stop Hitler, the problem with chaos theory in general is you have no idea what happens after that. You could have a Holocaust that's way worse than what Hitler could ever do. Or we could have a Hitler type person that we just can't stop. Which is also just bad. These are all bad things. And even if the risk is minimally low, And the reward is very high, like, and it works, the reward is very high, you still make this decision that affects truly everyone without consulting them. The only way this becomes a neutral action at best is if everyone agrees, or at least, not even, you would actually have to truly have everyone agree, if you want it to not be it, but, that's not realistic. Alright, so you'd have to get, like, a majority of people to think this is a good idea. You can't, but, I mean, at that point, you know, and now I gotta deal with these distractions. What's your name, kid? Lucky? Ha, we'll see about that. Try solving these puzzles. But that's the main problem with that, anyways. Is that, it's always selfish. And it's not, you know, it's okay to do selfish things, but what you do in the grand scheme of things directly changes the outcome for everyone, which is where the problem lies. That's the whole problem. Time travel is always a bad action, unless you can control everything. And I mean everything. If you can control all variables, then time travel stops being a bad action, because you're no longer taking a risk reward. You know, you're affecting, even if it's selfish, as long as you can control everything, so a certain outcome happens, it doesn't change anything negative. It's, you know, it becomes a good or neutral action. The only other way I think you could get around this, and determine it to be a neutral action or a good action. Say someone dies, and you immediately travel back in time. That might get you away with this. Because, in that situation, what is it? In that situation, you don't know any of the outcomes. No one does. So you're not changing anything, really, because it just happened. I think I don't really have the case to make that argument. But if there was a way you're gonna argue where time travel is inherently a bad action without knowing what happens afterwards, I think that is the only way you could describe it to be a neutral and or good action. Because
well,
you don't know what it was affecting in the first place. It's unknown knowledge.
Well, Zinker, if you go back in time to stop someone's death, you're still, and you succeed and you stop their death. And the future the future that you reach it, when you come back to that, when you eventually circle around to that given time again, you could then things are different than they were at that time. You still have done the exact same thing.
Yeah, I don't really have.
If that person's still alive, you still did.
Derek, I don't have the intent.
And them still being alive.
Stop interrupting me. God damn.
Or like what?
I don't really have the best argument for this, but what I'm saying is, if you go, like, say someone gets shot, and you travel back 30 seconds in time, to stop that, you effectively, no one has any idea what the world was gonna be like when that happens. You haven't. It's like you avoid changing anything, because you never actually let any outcomes begin to play. It's more like you saw the future, which even then, I guess, still.
So so because you don't know how bad the future could be, it's not.
I don't know. I'm saying you could argue it. I'm not saying I have an argument for it. I'm saying you could argue that maybe if you don't let the outcome play out fully, you might have an excuse for why something is the way it is. That's what I'm arguing.
So let me give you this counterpoint. So, in the scenario where you stop someone someone dies, you immediately go back in time.
Yes.
And stop, and
but
you go back 30 seconds. you stop them from dying.
Yes.
You stop them from dying, right?
Right.
All right. So, let's say as soon as you save them, and then they immediately just start shooting into a crowd.
Well,
Now, we never reached that future, but we know they weren't going to do that while they were dead.
but we don't know if the person that shot that... Derek, alright, think about BoJack. Mass shooter stops another mass shooter because they both go to the same place to mass shoot. Right? This could be that scenario. You don't know if the other guy was going to continue too. Let's say you kill him to stop that guy from getting killed.
Well, he had one less bullet, though.
Yeah, that's true.
Although I guess he still did kill someone with it, so like
he might. Yeah,
I guess he's still gonna net equal
the death
net
count
equal amount.
didn't change. Well, so
it's just who died. It's just
Yeah.
it's just one more person that in this scenario it's one more person that died instead.
yeah. Well, we don't know because the other guy could be like a bad shot too, so that's not even true. But here's the.
Well, yeah, or you could be a better shot.
So I mean, in that specific scenario, it's hard. I think the circumstances would have to align, just like your friend just got shot. Your friend who is not a mass shooter. You go back 30 and stop him from getting shot and kill what might be a mass shooter. You haven't changed the world much because only like 10 seconds of the world afterwards got the player, 30 seconds or whatever before this happened. So in that sense, you have control over the actions being taken because, like with the Holocaust, right? Long term, like short term, you stop Hitler from getting power, the Holocaust doesn't happen, blah, blah, blah. So if you go back 20 seconds after Hitler would take power and kill him, you've prevented that. Him having power and possibly causing the deaths of millions. And that's all that's known. That 20 seconds, like, that's all you've changed in the world because that's all you know that happened. All the actions that have resulted from time travel. Obviously, something different has happened, but, like, I don't know how to explain it. Those aren't things that happen. You're not changing anything yet, because it hasn't happened yet. So it doesn't exist. At that point, it's just, I don't know. It's really hard to explain this. But like, basically, your friend gets shot and killed. That's bad action. And you got shot, killed. We know nothing that happens after that because we immediately travel back in time and we stop it. The only thing that has been changed, realistically speaking, is our friend is alive. And possibly the mass shooter that was going to shoot a bunch of other people is dead. Those are all good. And because so much was unknown, arguably, when we made the decision to go back in time and save our friend, it was entirely a good action. Because all the factors, all the variables were controlled to make good action. Because we only let 30 seconds happen. Whereas you go back and change the Holocaust, which happened years, well, not even years, like decades, whatever ago. I don't know, I'm not a history major. Even if
Decades
all that,
are longer than years.
It's way more than years. We've
He said years. He said not even. Well, not even years. Decades.
I mean, yes, that makes sense. But you were changing however many so years, where you just don't know what happens. There's no way you could control that. But arguably, in the 30-second scenario, you have controlled everything to be a favorable outcome for all. You never know what's gonna happen in the future, in general. So you can't like you don't know if what you just did would cause another Holocaust. Like, it could cause a Holocaust, but not a second Holocaust by you saving your friend. But that's not known, so you didn't change that because that outcome never happened. Does that make sense? Anyhow,
Yeah.
this is like a technical way to get away from it being a bad action. It would be, I mean, I've learned in general that no matter what it is, no matter what rule, there's always an exception to it, or whatever. There's an exception to everything. So, you know, but that is something I've learned to be true in life. Whether it be the most specific example ever, you always find an exception. Alright. You might have to think about it real hard. So there is an exception where time travel is not a bad action, but in general, generally speaking, time travel under most causes, unless you can control all the variables of chaos theory, which you really can't, that's the whole point, is bad, because unless the only other option being everyone agrees that's a good option, which would be impossible. So you have to go for the second best thing of more than half people agreeing that's the best option. And even then, there you go. You guys see that gem in the waterfall? We'll collect it next time on Speletons. Bye-bye.